Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the newest edition of AmiSights. I'm Ami Kisser, your host, along with my co-host, Lynn Ozer, aka SBA Queen. What a treat today. All the way from Israel, we have Nirit Cohen, who's going to talk to us all about interesting things about the future of work, especially how it applies to small businesses and entrepreneurs. Nirit, why don't you start by just sharing with us what you're interested in and why?
Thank you, Ami, for hosting it, me and Lynn. I've been working in the space of the future of work way before it was a word that people were using. I think I worked for Intel for almost 30 years, and somewhere around 2007, 2008, when the iPhone came in, wireless started kind of seeping into our everyday lives, and the cloud was enabled by lots of tools. It became clear that if you look into the future, we will live and work very differently from what we were used to. I mean, if you go back to 2006, you probably had like a Nokia or Sony Ericsson right in your pocket, maybe a BlackBerry, if
A BlackBerry,
yeah.
woo!
And think about all the stuff that's actually completely normal and day to day for you today, like like YouTube and Spotify and Facebook and WhatsApp and all this stuff, ways, or navigation that wasn't possible back then. And so we think about the future as like maybe a nicer iPhone, but it's not. It's a lot of things that are unthinkable and impossible today that will become normal and everyday. And I was working with Intel in human resources, and I looked at this and I said, okay, what would it feel like to work in 2020? And for me, 2020 was the future way before it knew it was going to become that. And we looked at that and we looked forward and we said, everywhere was going to be a new location, and everything was going to be the new work, and everyone was going to be the new talent. And what would we need to do to get there, to be prepared? And so I was hooked. And for me, it became a hobby that, was very weird hobby. Some people do lots of things. I read future of work stuff and I started writing. And I've ever since then, so for over a decade, I have a regular column on the future of work and how it is changing how we work as individuals in our careers, how we need to work within organizations and leadership, and also bigger perspectives of education and social systems. So I really love the opportunity to talk to you, because the whole idea of people as entrepreneurs is, to me, it's not an if, it's a when. So when you're in your kind of longer career cycle, there's going to come a time you will supplement what you do with things that you own, that you are the manager, that is the business and the company of you.
So,
Do you think it's just that at some point you will be, or do you think that everyone will basically be, well, here in the United States, we call them 1099, but contractors that are their own entrepreneurs, no matter what they do, like that companies will never have employees, that in the future, everyone will be their own business, and that's how work will be. I'm just
So it's really interesting. If you look at the 1099 economy, it's been consistently climbing. So the numbers are showing us all the time that there are more and more people who are doing something in the space of earning even a dollar that they didn't earn through their employer. And about
right.
half of that, last time I looked, half of those people used to be salaried employees doing something else, right? So it could be I'm an employed accountant and I'm doing some kind of personal accounting for tax returns for my friends at night. It could be I'm an employed accountant and I have an Etsy shop, and because I like to draw and I'm selling my jewelry online or something. So we see these numbers consistently growing. And if you look at what COVID did, right, a lot of people who thought that employment by companies was the safe way to go for employment stability, right, discovered it wasn't. And what usually happens is we don't try something because it's too risky to lose what we have. But COVID changed the rules. I mean, you sat at home. whether it was, you got fired because, there was no job, or because you put on leave, you sat at home and there was nowhere to go to look for something alternative. So people said, you know what, I've always wanted to learn coding, or I've always wanted to open a store on Etsy, or, learn how to sell on eBay. And they tried that out. And when we came out of COVID, we could see a lot more people who were not giving that part up. So will we go all the way? I don't know how to answer that. Technically speaking, when we talk about everyone is your new talent, I think in parallel to people learning that they need that actually employability is also dependent on sometimes not being at the hands of somebody else to make decisions for you, right? Which is what happens when you kind of own your own employability. The other side of it is companies are learning that there's talent out there that they cannot employ in the form of employees, and that they can go access that talent in the form of, and we don't have the words, right? So we call them freelancers or small businesses, but it's really people who are companies of one, and they're willing to trade their, services. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's services, right? For something. And when companies start learning that and learning how to access that talent and employ that talent, and I think labor laws need to change globally as well, because there's some problems there. We might see a situation, and we're seeing it, by the way, in startups, where I don't employ the people that work in my startup. I actually contract with them. They're doing work for me, but I'm paying them through a 1099 system.
It's true.
Let's back up a little bit, Nirit. So I own a company with 12 or 13 people. What do you think we need to be thinking about that I'm not today?
So first of all, I think there are two, and I'm oversimplifying this, but two really big changes going on, right? One is technology, and technology is a word that covers a lot of things, but it's really the idea that you will continue to do things as they were, that your business will stay as it is, that the way you go about it, that the tools you use, even that the talent you need and the skill set, right? That's not going to happen. And so there really is no such thing as stability, right? You think you nailed it, you think you figured it out, you think you know what you're doing. It's around the corner, you just can't see it yet. So you really need to go actively looking. So really understand that, again, this is one of those, it's not an if, it's a when, right? Understand that there are tools happening, there are capabilities that are being entered, whether it's about you able to do things in a different way, or maybe disrupting your whole industry. And we clearly see it in fact in everywhere, right? So it's whether, it doesn't matter if you call it the same, it's the how you go about doing it that's changing, and how rapidly it's changing depends on your industry and what you're doing. So that's kind of the one space, right? The technology aspect. There's another space that's often overlooked, and it's the people aspect. COVID was a pandemic. It taught us that life is short, and every day we go to work is a day of our lives that we trade. It better be worth it. And people suddenly realize that the fact that we were used to doing something doesn't mean we need to keep doing it, right? And so we saw the Great Resignation, and then the Great Reshuffle or return, we call it all sorts of names, was really about people saying, you know what, don't have to keep doing what I did just because, right? So I'm going to ask myself some questions. And I think we're seeing a lot of trends that are suggesting that the contract of work is changing, that the social contract is changing, of what do I want to do, how am I allowed to say, we used to say things like, oh, I worked till 11 p.m. and we wore it like a badge of honor. It was like, I'm a good person, I work really hard. Today people aren't willing to do that anymore. So they want something different, and they're asking, and I think that transforms the definition of what's success and the definition of work and life and everything in between. And so when you put those together, this idea of how I want my career to work, when do I start, stop, maybe take a break, maybe because I need to learn, maybe because I want to go, do something fun, and then come back, and people will work a lot more years, about double of what we used to call a career once. And they won't have the pension or retirement in the definition of one day you can stop doing work and somebody will pay for you to have fun. That's not going to be that model doesn't exist anymore. So yes, we can save. No, we don't want to work the same way, but there are other periods in our lives where we don't want to work the same way. So this idea that people are asking for something different and what value and what meaning and what development, if you're sitting here as an employer, right, suddenly gives you a whole motivational paycheck that you could use, where you get talent and you motivate them and you pay them in ways that are different from, let's hire a person full time and give them a salary and some benefits that are acceptable in the market. Which for small businesses, by the way, opens up a whole world of opportunities.
See, it's interesting. You're looking at from the perspective of the employee, right? And what people and the freedom they want, this and that. But I think COVID also changed the future of work in other ways. In that, and I don't think anyone really understands this yet. It made for smaller companies, it made outsourcing or offshoring work much more culturally acceptable. And so pre-COVID, like we have a woman on our team from the Philippines now. Pre-COVID, I would never have dreamed that was possible.
Yep, I agree. And I think I tell you the story from the perspective of people, because organizations are still clinging. It's really interesting because we're all people, right? But as a person, you say, yay, isn't this fun? I can, get a lot more flexibility and do things in different ways. As a manager, you suddenly put your hat on, you say, okay, but I don't like it because I'm not sure how to measure, motivate, how do I know that they're working? How do I know that, they're not doing other stuff as I'm paying them? So COVID forced us into this situation. Because if I had come to you like in 2019, try to convince you this was the right way to go, you might have said, on a curve of, how if you're risk averse or not, you might have given it a try or not. COVID didn't ask for permission. It basically forced us into this experiment. But if you actually look at the return to office conversation that's been going on in the US for the last 2 years, the experiment's over. Employees are not relenting. They like what they have, and managers are saying, but this isn't working because we don't know how to build trust and build culture and make sure people are working. And the reason I'm telling the story through the eyes of people is I'm basically saying, look, this isn't going away. Once people figured out they have an option, they're also figuring out that if you won't let me, I won't work for you anymore. I'm going to work for somebody who will, or for myself. And here we get back to everyone's going to have that option and figure out how to do it if they want control over their own career. So I'm really glad you're extending your business to somebody in the Philippines, because it's not just about access to talent, and maybe it teaches you how to manage remotely, right? And how to engage a person, how to bring them into your organization.
It's also not easy. And I guess I think we're going to be struggling for this for decades, but it's not black and white.
Yeah.
We had an employee start. He was with us for 6 weeks in a sales role remotely. He quit. We went into his emails to just see if there were any outstanding emails to check. He had not sent or received an email in 6 weeks.
Yeah. So what are you going to do something different next time you bring in on board?
I don't want to be the thought police. I had a remote worker. I had a remote worker once who was working 2 jobs at once, 2 full-time jobs.
Yeah. That's, by the way, it's really interesting conversation going on now with AI, because a lot of people are figuring out how to use AI to free up time. And the question is, who owns that time? So if I work for you, because a salaried employee is an ownership model, right? Basically, you pay me for showing up in the morning, not for it's not an outcome based direct payment method. When you're self-employed, right, or you're a business, you basically get paid for delivering something and not for showing up in the morning. And I think what we're going to have to shift is employees being kind of measured differently. But it's a really interesting conversation because AI frees up time. So some people are saying, okay, you figured out how to use AI, you're doing it in less time, going to give you more work. And employees, on the other hand, some of them are doing what you said. They're saying, I freed up time. It's my time. I learned AI. I worked really hard, freed up time. Either I'm going to the gym or I'm going to get another job. My choice. It's a really interesting conversation.
But here's the question, as an owner, entrepreneur, manager who has, quote, employees, I think that, especially in, I mean, I look at Ami and the business that he runs, it's very results oriented, but the way that it's structured, you know, I don't know, Ami, if I'm just in your head, but these people can work anywhere they want as long as they are producing. I think, I don't think Ami spends time worrying if somebody's going to the gym or not. I think he really doesn't care when they go to the gym or what they do as long as they're producing. But that's fine for the people that are in that role. Other people, maybe support people. I still think, the value of an employee is what they're deliverable. And that's how it has to be measured, not that they're punching a clock. And I also think that even if back in the day when you worked in the office and punched a clock, that people felt more valued when you as a manager appreciated what their output was versus what what time they got there and what time they left.
You're right, Lynn. I think the problem is there's more layers to that, because culture in an organization is a lot of things we do and say and a lot of things we don't do and don't say, and it's a lot of even the blanks between the words, right? Culture is very elusive. True. It's not just about here's work, do it, I'll say thank you and I'll pay you. And it's very hard for us. Human beings are, social animals. So we interact, we build relationships. If I have a relationship, I might, extend more trust. I might give you more leeway. Maybe I know you enough to know if I can give you a task and let go, or if I need to, be there more because I know you. But if I don't know you, then the distance makes it all really quiet. In the office, you were new, but by design, you'd pick up. I mean, I'd see the person sitting in their cubicle all day, not doing anything, right? Ami would have picked that up a lot sooner. We don't have the tools. We don't have the tools as managers to figure it out. So I think that's something we will learn. It's almost like a gym for leadership capabilities and for building organizations and building culture. And we have to figure out how to do it. I'm just going to say that a lot of global organizations have figured it out, because when you are like me and you work in a global company, but you're not sitting at headquarters, other than, the frequent flights to the West Coast, I also needed to learn to build relationships and trust and to understand whether my people are need more or less help. And I needed to do it, through other means, just because there was no choice. I think that's why we're struggling. It's going to take some time, but I'm more optimistic. I think it's going to take less time.
One thing that I think about is, I think about these kids in the US graduating college. Okay. And I think that I call COVID an introvert's dream and an extrovert's nightmare. Okay.
That's really good.
But I think that for these introverts who are so excited that they don't have to go into an office and interact with all these people, and they can work from anywhere, or they can work from their bedroom, and that's the life that they want, they are also missing out on they're also missing out on core skills. And I'll tell you a story for what it's worth. My son graduated 2.5 years ago. Okay. And he started at Accenture, like a 900,000 person company. And COVID was over. And they trained the kids remotely. Okay. And he went crazy. There was nothing. There was no work. There was nowhere in the office to go to. There was nowhere to interact to. His manager was in Pakistan, not emailing him back. He hadn't bid for projects. And then luckily he got another job at a small community bank. And he was in an office with 8 people. And like 6 weeks after he was there, they had a small rift. And one of the women he worked with got called into an office, and she had to pack up her box and leave the office. And he was devastated. And I said, Sam, do you realize that when you were at Accenture, they laid off 10% of their staff?
You just didn't see it.
You didn't see it. You
Yeah.
didn't feel it. You didn't know it. You didn't understand it. And I don't think these kids need offices to go to. They need to learn how to interact with people and talk to people and politics and, the banter around the water filter or whatever they call it. And there are things that they need. And I think it's freaking awful for a kid
Yeah.
to start their career like out of their bedroom. It's awful.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. By the way, careers out of bedrooms are a problem for many of us, because this idea that you have one persona at home and another persona at work, and we use the getting dressed and traveling to the office to, to shift spaces, right? So I think that's what happens when you're in transition, because we haven't learned how the right kind of balance. I don't think it's anyone does whatever they like. I also don't think it's extreme either way. And I also don't think it's a one size fits all. I think you're absolutely right. When a person needs to get to know the organization, whether it's because they just out of college, they don't even know how to work, or whether it's, they're seasoned professional, but they don't know the people in the organization. Again, trust is about, some relationship building. We need to figure out what the right systems are to make that happen. So I think we're not there. We're still talking in headlines like hybrid or 2 days a week, or that's not how you do it. I mean, I like a lot more some of those researchers that talk about moments that matter. Right? How do you curate relationships and moments that matter and understand what people need? So I think you're absolutely right. We haven't figured it out. But back is not a direction into the future. And saying, let's go back into the office or back to the way things were, because frankly, if we're honest, they weren't that great. We talked about work-life balance for a really long time. We talked about women not participating in the workforce because of, families. We talked about diversity issues because some people don't fit into the boxes of how we defined work. So we need to redesign. And we need to redesign given the tools we have, which give us more choices and more flexibility and more personalization. And that's uncomfortable because nobody taught us to redesign. Remember, you went to school, there was a right answer, you learned the right answer, you took a test, you got 100. Nobody taught us that there wasn't a right answer and you needed to figure it out. Maybe Lego did, but it didn't come with a picture of what you needed to build.
So interesting that you said that don't go back to the office or back. you're right. The future
Back
is
to the
not
future.
going
Yep.
back to the future. No, you have to go forward to the future, not back to the future. And yeah, it's a transition and we're going to take time, but I can't say that I don't totally fear for, well, one of my kids goes to work every day, but my one child that doesn't, it makes me crazy. I don't know how does she expand her world, her network, her social network, her working network when she's in her apartment? It's not healthy. And, you know, the whole thing is just, it's frightening to me.
Yeah, I will say one thing. Remember that because we lived in a world where work was a place you went to, that's where social life happened, because we walked into that building at 8 o'clock and we left it at 6 p.m. and we were there, and that's where social life happened. That wasn't always the case. There were times when human beings did not work in offices and buildings, right? And we had social lives. And so some of the questions is your social life necessarily connected to work the way our social life was connected to work? And again, I'm not trying to say there's a right answer. I'm just saying the fact that they need to learn skills and interact with people and learn how to work and how to fail and how to grow. There are lots of other ways to surround yourself with people. And again, having said that, I still think work needs some balance of face-to-face time with digital time.
Agreed.
I remember reading a study somewhere, and I can't quote it because it's such a memory, but that when organizations have layoffs, the remote workers are the first to go. Is that true?
I am not familiar with that data. I will say that we have been seeing this whole raging debate about do you lose your social capital, which is really you knowing about me, right? And choosing me when you have to make a list of somebody to let go. So that's why I talk to both sides, right? Because I also tell people is you have to figure out the skills. So if you want to work remotely, figure out the skills to build relationships and social capital and impact and trust and be a dependable person that people know you will deliver and everything else we talked about. I don't think so. There was Dell, for example, came out with this idea a few months ago that said if you're working remotely, we won't promote you. You're not going to be eligible for promotion. And frankly, like I said, I have a weekly column in the Future Work, and I wrote as a Dell customer, right? What does it say to me using a tools designed by Dell to help me be an on-the-go, productive person, that they're telling their people if you're on the go, you can't be a productive person. And what's that going to do to their ability to design the tools for their customers? I'm going to question that. So, I think it's still debating. We'll see how that pans out.
Can I give you a contrarian point of view?
Of course. Otherwise, wouldn't it be fun?
That you might not like. I think that part of the COVID bubble or the COVID revolution or whatever you want to call it, or all this freedom or this independence was partially driven by the US and governments around the world literally printing trillions and trillions of dollars and flooding it into economies. And they really didn't have much choice. Okay. But money was flowing everywhere. And whether it was to individuals or to businesses or to tax credits or this or that or the other, and people felt quite entitled. Okay. And now that party is rapidly ending. And money is tightening up. And I think we're in for a tough economic slug here in the US and maybe around the world. And
Mhm.
And so some of that in like the employer or the employee, like I hate to say it, the employee, I get confused. The boss is going to have more leverage today or in 6 months than they had a year ago.
So
And
I'm Israeli, we argue. Um, it- here's some things to consider. The talent pool is shrinking. Um, eh, what I mean by shrinking is skills and capabilities are aging really quickly, which means that within a few years, half of what we know, right, it becomes obsolete. So I'm really good at a lot of things nobody needs anymore. And so it's not about whether there are people out there, but whether there are people out there to do the work that you need to get done. And now couple that with the fact that you just told me that suddenly you're able to think about the option of hiring somebody who's not physically located next to you. I think what we'll see is if you can easily hire somebody right next to you, your office, you might, bring them in, have them sit at a desk, if they're willing, right? If you can't, you're going to be forced to ask, well, where do I have people that can do what I need them to do? And maybe because money's tight, you might ask them, where do they exist and they will be cheapest for me, right? So if you decide that they exist in the Philippines or somewhere else, and you figure out how to make it work, the next time will be easier. So I think it doesn't mean that it's always going to be a great economy, but people's skills are aging faster than they're replenishing them, because we went to school, we thought we got a degree, and that kind of gave us a title of a profession, and that will hold. And that's no longer true. And that, by the way, is true for car mechanics and for professors, right? And so you need to learn, unlearn, relearn all the time. And that by design means that you will be looking for people who have skills, and the talent pool won't grow. There's really no reason to assume that it will grow. So I understand the part where governments behave very differently. In fact, we see a very big difference between the US and Europe. COVID in the US gave money directly to the people, right? And so the companies let them go. And so effectively, a lot of them didn't come back. They actually went to the 1099 economy. In Europe, the governments gave the money to the employers. They basically said, even if they don't work, you pay them. And so the employee-employer relationship was kept. And so a lot less people got lost out to the 1099 economy, which is probably just one reason. There's probably other cultural reasons as well. But you're right? We're not, there's no stable, steady state yet. And I'm not going to
I
say
don't think
right
the
now what's
talent
going to
pool
happen.
is shrinking. I think the talent pool is increasing. Because I can go anywhere. I can get shit done anywhere in the world now.
That's okay, good, right? But that's a new version of talent pool. Because if we had this conversation 4 years ago, you would be looking at your physical location talent pool.
Right.
I agree with you now, but it's only expanding if you're willing to say, you know what? I don't need to necessarily hire them the way I used to. I don't need to necessarily employ them the way I used to. So if, for example, in Israel, in the startup economy, right, it's very clear because the talent pool has always been limited, that people basically say, why do I need to hire somebody for full time? I might need a really top of the line X, right? I'll get them as a service, or I'll get them as a freelancer. I'll pay them a lot of money, but I'll limit the hours that I'm using, and so my overall, I can control costs. And if I need something else, maybe I'll find it in Ukraine or in India.
It's all fascinating, and I think what it's a big pile of gray stuff, right? I mean, I look at it. We're in this beautiful office in the middle of our little town. Okay. I rented it on a 5-year lease in the middle of COVID. Okay. And some days, and I was like, people are coming back to work. And we're here half time. And when we're here together, it's amazing. But sometimes I'm like, especially now where the economy is getting tighter, I'm like, why the hell am I spending this money?
Right.
Okay. And I look at it, I have some friends who've moved their companies entirely virtual.
Right.
And part of me is like, they're crazy. They can't build culture. They can't scale. We need to be together and this and that, but they're really spreading internationally. And so all of these challenges, so as the economy tightens up, some functions, all these fractional services.
Yeah.
Some functions for small businesses can be done for less money, and people are going to start to think about it.
Yep, I agree. And
So
we actually see a lot of, X as a service, really good people who can come in and do marketing as a service and CMO as a service and, CFO as a service.
it's there's like this balancing act, but I think all I'm saying is part of it will also be the economic what's going on in the economy. Money was flowing when people were feeling independent and they could do what they wanted and this and this and that. Money was flowing.
Yep.
Money isn't flowing anymore.
Yep. I agree. It's going to be really interesting to see where this.
That's part of the equation, I think. So.
Yep.
I think that the other thing is like building your brand when you're just an individual and then trying to work for many different companies. You don't build your brand like when you have a company. I don't know. That seems to me that it's easier when you have all the people rowing in the same direction instead of just you, and then the people that come there also go to your competitors to do the same thing. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's really it's really interesting because we think of it as how can somebody serve me and my competitor, right? In terms of
well, that's what I think.
Right. And for a long time, by the way, we used to say things like, so for example, large corporations had rules against second job. Because if we basically said, well, if you have more time, I can give you something to do. What do you mean you go work with something else? Which circles back to, if AI frees up some of your time, who owns the time now, right? Is it I get to give you more work, or you get to go on vacation or take another job? And I think that's a debate that we'll see raging in the next few years. So will you be able to, I mean, if you really need a CMO and the only one you can afford is part-time to get the right level of talent, you might work around, how do I make sure that you're, that there's no conflict of interest, or explain to me how that works. And you will decide if you settle for someone less because you need to hire them full-time because you need to own them, or you're getting a good answer.
Yeah, I don't like the word own, but I do understand. I mean, I agree. It seems
but that's the ownership model is what we've had, right? The salaried model is ownership.
Yeah,
you work for me, I own your time.
Right. Then we're all on the same team.
It's been a fascinating conversation. It's been
it could go on and on and on. We could talk about this endlessly.
And I could talk for hours, but unfortunately, I gotta go. So I thank you for this. Nirit is in Israel. Our hearts and prayers are with everyone there who is struggling through a very long and protracted battle. And we're thinking about all of you every day. And Thank you for sharing this. Where, if people want to learn more about you or your work or read your work, where do they go?
So, Google is a good place to start. I have a very large subscriber list on Substack on a newsletter called The Future of Less Work.
The future of less work.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You get to it quicker that way,
We'll,
probably.
we'll get that Substack thing and on the show notes, so we'll get it included.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hosting me, Ami and Lynn.
It was a
Very-
pleasure to meet you.
Thank
It
you
was
so much.
fascinating to hear what you're doing.
Thank you
Great
so
work.
much. Take care. Bye-bye.